Taiman guaranteed that nobody got up late for davening today. It's we got an early rise.
It's interesting, they have the timetable of Shachar.
Oh, for sure. Just I have to send them the exact Netzach Hama of sunrise, so people should get up to Vatikan Minyan. You know, they have to fine tune it. They have to find
What time they're on in Yemen? No,
what time for a zone.
the difference.
Yeah, they're a little bit ahead of us, but not much. Maybe an hour. Maybe.
What happens if you're in the middle of davening and the siren goes off?
It's not a shaila. It's not a shaila. Even if you think it's a shaila, there's an answer. You move yourself to a protected area. That's what you do. You don't continue davening. There's a
Something is the children that want their way to school.
okay, beseda. So there's look. We have to prepare even in a school situation and going to school. All these things is taken into consideration also. Okay. Last week, we dealt with this page of Yiten, Roshi, Mayim, the poem of the Kalonymus family poets, which is said in Ashkenazi ritual on Tisha B'Av, and we'll see that the poem was actually written for Tisha B'Av. There's explicit references to the day of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash and reading this poem today, but it refers to the series of pogroms in 1096 in the aftermath of the First Crusade, where the church wanted to capture Yerushalayim from the Islamics, from the Muslims, but on the way just overrun Jewish communities. And the three major Jewish Torah centers called the Arei Shum, Shin Vav Mem, Spire, Vermizia, which is Worms, and Mainz, which was known as Magensia, they were decimated in this time framework between the 8th of Iyar, which was last week, and the 23rd of Iyar, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the 3rd of Sivan, and the 6th of Sivan, which is Chag HaShavuot. And all of these dates are mentioned specifically in this particular poem. I remember switching around the atmosphere or the environment of mourning, of Evel, to Simcha. So we know that in the period of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, cuts it. And for some people, it's the end marking of the period of Evel. And even for those who observe from Pesach all the way until Shavuot, which was the original period of mourning from the days of the Geonim, Lag BaOmer kicks in as an exception. Everybody knows that Lag BaOmer, you can have weddings and everything goes, and music, the works. So that applies even for somebody who observes the Avelut from Pesach until Shavuot, and the third minhag, which became the Ashkenazi minhag of some communities, from Rosh Chodesh Iyar until Shavuot. Lag BaOmer is an exception. Lag BaOmer was given this for a variety of reasons, and mostly became because of the Kabbalistic take on it as being the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and everything that Lag BaOmer is all about. So that eventually infiltrates all the communities. But there are many who continue the period of Avelut after Lag BaOmer. Some of those who never ended the Avelut with the 33rd, basically it meant the 34th of the Omer, and those who started on Rosh Chodesh Iyar and kept it going until Shavuot. So Lag BaOmer is an interruption. But I remember asking my father, Shalom, after the 6-day war, and then we heard the next year that a Yom Tov was established on the 28th of Iyar, Yom Yerushalayim, the day of unification of Yerushalayim. I mean, if a Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make Yomim Tovim to add to the calendar, why did he do it Dafka in the Omer? God could have picked other dates in the calendar year for this to happen. That Dafka it should be in the days of the Sphira. And my father answered that perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending us a message that the Avelut is coming to an end. And I like that. I like that very much. On the 5th of Iyar, the 28th of Iyar, we have Lag BaOmer in between. So you have something about the Avelut coming to an end. But I also mentioned, perhaps some of you have heard this from me already, the thought of Rabbi Zvulun Charlap, who is who was the rabbi of the Mashula Jewish Young Israel of Mashula Parkway in the Bronx for many, many years. But he was also the dean of REITs, of Yitzhak Fanan Yeshiva, for quite a few years as well. He used to mention that the name Iyar Aleph Yud, Yud Reish, spread out as an abbreviation, is Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim. It gives a reference to the two new Chagim that we have in our calendar, one to do with Eretz Yisrael, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and the other with Yom Yerushalayim. Aleph Yud, Eretz Yisrael, Yud Reish, Yerushalayim. Cute homiletic take on the name Iyar. But we've never forgotten the period of the Omer, and last week we spent a lot of time dealing with the issue of Rabbi Akiva and his students. But then at the end of this year, I mentioned that I brought Rabbi Daniel Shperver's book of Minhagei Yisrael, Volume 1, where he brings all the various sources to document this, that the upgraded status of mourning, of Avelut, that we have from Rosh Chodesh Iyar until Shavuot is an Ashkenazi invention, and it's in reaction to the pogroms of 1096. And to that end, this particular poem. So let's just see, today we have some time to do the poem properly. So I mentioned that this poem has a lot of crying with it. It begins with crying, there's crying in the middle, it ends with crying. It's just one big crying where the content is almost, you have to snuff it out between the tears. Mi Yiten Roshi Mayim. That's a phrase out of Megillat Eicha. Actually from the Pasuk of Yirmiyahu, it's not even Mecha. It comes from Yirmiyahu. Mi Yiten Roshi Mayim. God should just swell my head with water because I need it for the tears. I need a reservoir of tears. Ve'eni mekor nozli. From my eyes will be a source of all my that which is flowing, the tears are flowing. I'm going to cry all my days and my nights, which means this is a type of wailing that it's not going to come to an end. We can't forget about this. This is ongoing. It's just ongoing. Et chalalei tapai, the corpse, the dead of my children, olalai, my infants, the Yisheshai Kahalai, and the aged, the older folks of the community, which means in the outset, he's not specifically focusing on any particular part of the community because Jews were murdered, and Jews are Jews, no matter what. Jews are Jews. Unfortunately, the unity of Jews are Jews is appreciated and felt under pressure and under duress. I wish we would have, unity when everything is wonderful. That's when everything falls apart. But usually when Am Yisrael is under pressure, that's when the unity comes out. And here, the poet is talking about the infants, the elder. No one was spared, which means from A to Z, no one was spared. Ve'atem anu avoy oy. We would say in Yiddish, oy vavoy, exactly. We would say, oy vavoy, nebuch ba'al alai, u'b'chol beche rav, ve'herev, al Beit Yisrael v'al Am Hashem ki naflu becharev. Am Yisrael and the nation of God. So I touched on this line last week, that Am Yisrael, the nation of God, are hyphenated. V'ata echad v'shimcha echad u'mika amcha Yisrael goy echad va'aretz. The idea that Am Yisrael, has this double kedusha to it, the sanctity of being part of the nation and the sanctity individual of between you, yourself, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Al Beit Yisrael v'al Am Hashem ki naflu b'charef, they fell. And that becomes the refrain at the end of each particular stanza. And the next stanza continues with the theme of crying. V'damoa, dema is cry, tidma einei. Again, my eyes are full of tears. Ve'elchali sdei bochim, a field of crying. I mean, in other words, it's just so, the quantity of tears are unimaginable. Va'avake imi marei levav, and I will cry with me, the broken hearts. Marei levav hanevuchim. Yeah, I want to touch on the word nevuchim in a second. Al betulot hayafot, the young girls, v'iladim arakim, and the tender children. Besifreihem nichrachim. They were wrapped with their books. You have to realize, when this poem was written, there was no print. So everything was all manuscript. And children went with their books in their hand as if wrapped with their books. It almost reminds me a little bit about Rav Chananya ben Tradion in the 10 Martyrs, in the Arzeh Halvanon, who was wrapped with the Sefer Torah as a type of symbolic idea, a person who just was a walking Sefer Torah all by himself. And here, it's the books of the young children going to their cheder, but nebuch, latevach nimshachim, being brought to slaughter. Odmu etzem mitninim sapirim venavachim, nafachim. Etzem is bones. Odmu from the word adom, red. Their bones were reddened. What was reddened? Well, these are children who had sparkling jewels. Pninim, sapirim, sapphires, and nafachim, all different types of sparkling red jewels. These were the wonderful kids. What did they become? Kemotit chutzot. Like today we use the word tit for cement of some sort, of the street. Nidashim v'nishlachim, just thrown out on the street. Suru tameh karu lamu milakarev. The enemy would call out, walk away from these. This is all tumah. It's all dead bodies here, what you see. I mean, it's a terrible description. Yet I want to go back to that phrase, marei levav hanevuchim. The broken-hearted, navoch means perplexed. Where does the word perplexed come in? Where do we have the word perplexed, nevuchim, for the first time in the Chumash? Nevuchim heim ba'aretz. Yafeh. Yeah, nevuchim, it's mentioned in the context of leaving Mitzrayim. The idea of OUisrael were perplexed, because here they were taken out of Mitzrayim, and they thought that, all right, that's it. Now we're free to go wherever we're going to. And all of a sudden, the Egyptians are running after them. And they said, what the cemeteries in Mitzrayim weren't good enough? That we had to be brought out to the desert to be buried? I mean, they were in a stage of perplexed. They didn't understand. We know that the Rambam used that word nevuchim in the book, Borei Nevuchim. His student in Chalab, which is in Syria, he had a student who was a correspondence course. He never met the student, who wrote him letters, regular periodic letters, and those letters took longer than the Israeli Post. The Israeli Post takes time. Yeah, it actually is possible. It took at least a half a year. Well, sometimes it takes a half a year too. But it took a long time for those letters to get to Egypt and then the Rambam to write back. And those responses of the Rambam become a full-blown book. It becomes Moreh Nevuchim in 3 different volumes. And it's basically this student, Yosef ben Yehuda ibn Enkin, he's perplexed because he knows Torah, and he also knows Greek philosophy, and there are clashes. And he wants the Rambam to help him out, resolve these issues, and that's what he does in these books of Moreh Nevuchim. At one point, this student writes that he'd love to meet the Rambam, and he's planning a trip, and the Rambam then in a letter writes his daily schedule. And from here we know Rambam's daily schedule, where he says, I'd love to meet you, but I don't have a minute to fit you into my schedule. Don't bother making the trip. That's how busy the Rambam was, both in terms of a physician in the Sultan, in the palace, and then running a private clinic for Jews and non-Jews alike. He didn't start studying Torah and writing till the evening hours, and he worked most of the night on this. That was the Rambam. So the word nevuchim means perplexed. What was the perplexity here? I don't understand this. We're Torah observant Jews. We are studying Torah. Not just Torah observant Jews. We are Torah observant Jews. We're studying Torah. And this was the great centers of Torah that produced some of the all-time greats of our Rishonim, like Roshi. So why did this happen? They just don't get it. They're perplexed. There's no answer. There's just no answer to this question. I remember we had a professor at Jewish history at YU, Professor Agis, and he had all kinds of controversial things to say, but amongst the controversial things, he had some interesting things. Usually the controversial things were very interesting. And most probably he set it up as a controversy, so you should pay attention. But he talked about wondering why Mashiach didn't come to the age of Ashkenaz of the 11th, 12th, and 13th century. Because what does a Kadosh Baruch Hu want from Am Yisrael? To be committed to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, to the last drop of Mesirut Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, to be involved in Torah study, to be involved in Torah performance. He claimed that there never was such a successful Jewish community as Ashkenaz, the 11th, 12th, 13th century, in terms of the pure numbers. For example, if you take the first Beit HaMikdash era, so you have Beit HaMikdash, and you have prophets, you have Kohen Gadol, you have everything. How many were Torah-observant Jews? A fraction. First of all, the Torah was not that well known to the masses. Who knew Torah? Shevet Levi. They kept it to themselves. And the masses were idol worshippers. And we see the Nevi'im, it wasn't that they caught somebody with a pesel, with a getchka. This was the way to go. They were idol worshippers. And when the kingdom split, 10 out of 12 tribes were idol worshippers. And that's why there was a churban. That's why there was destruction. Things improved dramatically in the second Beit HaMikdash, where the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah came out with a motto, a program, and that is Hamidu Talmidim Harbe. Spread the word. Yehi Beitcha Beitvad Lachachamim in Pirkei Avot. Have chugim, have clubs of Torah study in your homes. Let the word go to everybody. This is not going to be centralized by the Levium. It didn't work. It has to decentralize, and everybody has to be. And the Gemara tells us in Masechet Yoma, Daf Ted, that at the end of the day, Beit HaMikdash II was destroyed not because of not studying Torah. They were studying Torah, and they were Gemilut Chasadim. It was all there. It was the problem of Sinat Chinam. They didn't love each other properly, the way they should be. But so Dr. Eger said, so how many already were more observant? Was it 10%, 15%, 20%? We had a problem with the Tzedukim, the Sadducean sect. We had a problem with the Isiim. We had sectarian Judaism going on by Cheney. So it wasn't 100%. Clearly it wasn't 100%. And then came the Churban, the destruction, and things just spread out. And we had to do with the Karaites in the Middle Ages as well. But where were the Karaites? Karaites were in North Africa, in Turkey, in Iraq. So do you have 100% compliance to Torah in the Middle Ages, in the Sephardi era? No. And what was going on in Spain? So Professor Eger shows that 60% of Spanish Jewry during the days of the Inquisition go Christian, become Catholic. That's what happens. Unfortunately, it's very sad commentary. But in Ashkenaz, that didn't happen. In Ashkenaz, yeah. What was that? Teiman, they were sitting up there waiting for the Chutim, right? That's correct. The Yemenite Jewry were somewhat isolated. We don't have, first of all, there was no Christian impact at all. Thanks for that fact. All the manuscripts of the Gemara and the Rambam were untouched by the censorship of the Jewish censors of Europe, so that the text wouldn't somehow cause a pogrom or whatever. But they had their own trouble. They had trouble from Karaites also, but they also had trouble from Islam. There was a lot of persecution there in Yemen, and Rambam deals with it in letters to them. So it's true. In that respect, the Yemenite Jewish community was a rather strong Jewish community, and it's not an accident that the Rambam felt very, very connected to that community. He felt this is a community that really has it right to a large degree. And even in his own Egypt, he's fighting Karaism. He's fighting it. That's the reason he leaves Eretz Yisrael to go to Egypt, for that particular reason. But in Ashkenaz, they didn't give up their lives. They also had the option to become Meshumadim, Mumarim, to go over to the Christian side, to save their lives. But they didn't do it. They trained their babies to give up their lives al Kiddush Hashem. That's what they did. And it was part of growing up that you might be called upon for Kiddush Hashem. And that's where it happens in the 11th, 12th, and 13th century in Ashkenaz. And yet they were asking this question, why? Why? And it almost sounds like in the Eila Eskara that we read the few lines last week with the Agadic tale of the Roman officer who came and asked the Shaila, what's the halacha if you kidnap a Jew and you sell him? And they said, well, it's a capital punishment offense. And of course, then the Roman said, well, wasn't Yosef sold and it's captive and sold and so on? So you guys are going to take the rap for it. That's how this, I mentioned last week, this was the poet taking us back to the scene of the crime of the first episode of Sinat Achim, of brotherly hatred, and so on. But later in the Eila Eskara, so you have the saying, Zu Torah v'zu schara, the Sarfei Mala, the Malachim were crying out, is this Torah and this is the reward? This is what, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, silence, you say another word, and I turn the whole world back to Tohu Vavohu. I'll destroy the whole world. You just keep quiet. That God has a cheshbon, and that is also the poet in the Eila Eskara telling us that the reaction to tragedy, both on the personal and certainly on the national level, is Vayidom Aron, silence. And the silence is deafening, because that silence means there's what to say, and it's difficult to bring it out, and you just keep it, and you accept. It's tziduk hadin. Hatzur tamim pa'alo kichol derachav mishpat el emuna ve'ein avel tzadik v'yasharu. We just swallow it up and keep it to ourselves. And it's very difficult. But how are the poets on Tisha B'Av able to let it out? And the Rav explained once, because Yirmiyahu taught us that for these kind of tragedies, you can let it out. And that's what Eicha, the book of Eicha is, how could you do this? What is Eicha for the word Eich? How can you do this? How can you do this? How can you do that? And then the poets later, from the 7th century onwards, picked up on this permissibility to let it out. And you see here, he's letting it out. We're navoch. We're navoch. And the Rav said that he remembers during the days of the Shoah, where Goyim were asking, how could this happen to the Jewish people? It's the same question. It's the same question. It's an ongoing question. So you have two stanzas of crying. And now he gets to the beginning. V'teirad eini dim'ah. Again, my eyes are going to have cries, tears are falling in my eyes. Ve'elila va'aguda. Ve'lifki v'lachgor sak. Ekra lahaspida. Again, crying, weeping, wearing a sack. Sak va'efer yutzal rabim used to be a type of garment of avelut. I'm going to call out a eulogy. Mipaz yikara umizahav chamuda. That smells like a pasuk from Tehillim Perik Chaf, right? Lamnasech mizvola David, where it says, Hashemayim misaprim korel masei yadav magid rakia yom leyom leyomer, and it says hanachamadim mizahav umipaz. So there's some reference to Torah. Torah Hashem Tmima Mishivat Nafesh. Eidut Hashem Ne'emana Machkima Peti. So, ladies, when you stood under, if you stood under the chuppah and you received a ring on the index finger, whether the Rav Masada Kedushin told you beforehand, why do we put it on the index finger? Because afterwards, the Rav always told the Kala that she can take it off and put it on any other finger or throw it in the garbage, but if she wanted to. But as long as it was hers to throw in the garbage. But she can put it on any other finger. But why is it customary? Because of the pasuk, Torat Hashem, the index finger comes out on the name of God. Torat Hashem Tmima Mishirat Nafshe. Eidut Hashem Ne'emana Machkima Peti. Pikudei Hashem Yisharim B'Sachen Leiv. And it goes on until Hanechamadim Mizahav. The gold falls out on the finger of Hashem's name. So we want to bring a Kadosh Baruch Hu under the chuppah, and that's how we do it. It's interesting, okay? So the idea of Hanechamadim Mizahav, Umipaz, this is where the Paitan says, Mipaz Yekara Umizahav Chamuda, he's going to talk about the loss and collapse of Torah. That which David HaMelech talked about, the beauty and the precious nature of Torah, Pnima kvuda, kvod kol klei chemda, that which its glory, its kol kvoda bat melech penima. You keep it to yourself. The Aron Kodesh covers the Sefer Torah, and the mantle covers the Sefer Torah, and it's always hidden. Just like in the Beit HaMikdash, there was a Kodesh Kodeshim that had the Aron, that had the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Luchot. It's all hidden, and to be hidden gives an impression of being very mystical, very, there's a certain distance and awe that are surrounding the Sefer Torah. And that nature of Sefer Torah, Re'itiha, I saw it, Kru'ah, ripped, shchula, without its children, which means without its students who are studying it. V'galmuda, left there open. Torah, Mikra, Mishnah, V'agada, all the branches of Torah. Torah includes Tanakh, the Mikra, Mishnah, the Torah Shebal Peh of the Halacha, and the Agada, the Agadot Chazal, the Midrash, all of it. All of it. Enu v'konenu zot lahagida. Well, we are going to yell out, "Hey Torah, where is the Torah?" And here there are two different versions. Is it v'talmud or talmid? If we read it, "Hey Torah v'talmud v'halomda," where is the Torah and the Talmud, and where is those who are studying it? The Rav preferred the version, "Hey Torah v'talmid v'halomda," and he said the following: where is the Torah? The Talmid is the Talmid Chacham, the one who constantly studies, and the Lomda is the occasional person who will open up a sefer. He'll listen to a Dvar Torah in shul between Mincha and Ma'ariv. He'll come maybe to a shir on Shabbat in the afternoon, or pay attention to a drasha in the morning. He's a Lomda. He's learning Torah once in a while, occasionally, which is no small matter. Because Chazal teach us that one of the questions that a Kadosh Baruch Hu asked a Neshama after 120 years, he doesn't ask how much did you accomplish. Nobody's interested to know how many times you finish Shas. That you can do, tell your family, make another siyum on the Shas, fine, okay. What Kadosh Baruch Hu is interested in, how much time did you allow in your daily schedule for Torah study? And you better come up with some answer. Even if it's once a week in shul, I hear a Dvar Torah. Okay? Don't say never. That's not going to fly. That's not going to be a good answer. What?
Nobody here will say never, because it was wrong.
Right, okay.
We're coming.
Right. So of course, if a neshama never studied Torah and he answers never, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu goes, no, what's the response? Response is, at least I didn't lie. That should be a schut. That should be a merit. I didn't lie, right? So the Rav felt that this was reflecting on the Talmid Chacham, the Talmid, and the occasional. Everybody was taken here. Those who are the great Talmidei Chachamim and the average person. Because every Jew was a lomed. There's no such thing in Ashkenaz in the 12th century that a Jew didn't crack a sefer. Everybody was a lomed. Everybody. They were on that level. Halo hamakom me'ein yoshev charev. It's now desolate and destroyed. That's straight out of Eicha. The phrase me'ein yoshev. It's what Beit HaMikdash was. Me'ein yoshev. Yerushalayim was me'ein yoshev. And he continues, again, beginning each stanza with the cry. Va'afapai yizlu mayim. This is my eyelids, eyelashes are all full of water. Dema lahagira. Va'konein mar. It's a bitter, bitter wail. Al harugei Ashpira. This is Spire, the city of Spire. When did this happen? Basheni, and the second month, which is Iyar, Bishmona Bo, on the 8th of the month. That was last week. And we know that it happened on a particular day of the week, Biyom Margoa, the day of rest. It happened on Shabbat. It was Shabbat, the 8th of Iyar. And was probably not an accident, no less than the Egyptians opening up their war in 1973 on Yom Kippur. Because they knew the Jewish calendar. And they knew what Shabbat was. And to attack on Shabbat was deliberate, because the Christians in the second generation of Christianity, after having adopted Torah, they moved away from Torah. And our day of rest is going to be Sunday and not Shabbat. So the observance of Shabbat was a very anti-Christian thing. And therefore they attacked on Shabbat. The current world is on Shabbat. Right. Okay, but the question is, so it could be that today they think that there is a tactical advantage where, people are in shul and whatever, or maybe we can hit a shul and get more casualties. They think in these categories. Biyom margoa hukara, margoa lirgoa. Right, so normally the day of Shabbat is a day that we should rest. Nechlefu lahavira, but flipped to be a day of burning. It wasn't a day of rest at all. Ne'ergu bachurei chemed, our young, beautiful young lads. V'yishishei hadara, again going back to the theme of the young and the old. Ne'esfu yachad nafsham hishlimu b'morah. They all gathered together and they gave up their lives in awe, out of morah, not fear, awe. Et Hashem Elokecha tira, out of awe from God. Al yichud shem hamyuchad. This is Kiddush Hashem, dying al Kiddush Hashem. Yichadu b'gvura, with great heroic moments. Giborei koach, osed dvaro lemahara. I mean, these are people who were great heroes, and they're doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted them to do, and they did it quickly enough. V'chohanei va'alamai nigva'u klaham asara. The Rav pointed out that there was a tradition that when the pogroms began, it actually, even on this day, the first day of the pogrom, there was an outburst against 10 leaders of the community. And then it just spilled over to the rest of the community. So the Paitan, the poet, is giving expression to the 10, that not forgetting that it actually began, but then it spilled over to the rest. And he continues, it almost refers to, that's correct, that the number 10 is not even being accidental here, right? Ubimar yugoni ve'atzbi yelel achbira. Again, the next stanza is beginning with the cry, and I cannot hide the cry. Kilot hakodesh harigatam hayom bezochra. Today, the day is being Tisha B'Av. The poet is writing this for recitation on Tisha B'Av. I'm going to remember their murder on Tisha B'Av. Of Kehal Vermaisia, worms, Bechuna u'Bechura, the chosen, special, excellent people. Geonei Eretz u'Nikiyei Tahara, they were the highest in Kedusha, in sanctity, of the loftiest people, and they're the brightest of all. Mayim Kichu Shemam Yuchad B'Morah. There were 2 pogroms. Be'esrim u'shlosha b'chodesh Ziv. Chodesh Ziv is the nickname of Chodesh Iyar in Tanakh, and it was the 23rd of the month. Letahara, to be purified. Act of Kiddush Hashem is an act of purification. U'b'chodesh hashlishi, and on the 3rd month, which is Sivan, b'kriyat Halel l'shorara, the day we said Halel, which is Rosh Chodesh, on Rosh Chodesh. Some wanted to suggest that this was Shavuos, but it would be out of order because the poet is taking us now to the 3rd of the month and then taking us to Shavuos. This clearly means Rosh Chodesh, Aleph, the first day of the month of Sivan. So there were 2 pogroms in Worms. Let me say a word about Worms. So today, to those people who bring groups to Ashkenaz and tour southern Germany, and you go to Worms on the Rhine River, they take you to Rashi Shul. Okay, that's almost as good as when you go to Beersheba and near the Bedouin Shuk, you go to Abraham's well, the Be'er Avraham. The statistical probability that Avraham Avinu was there is 0, because today's Beersheba is not the Beersheba of Avraham Avinu. It's what we call Tel Sheva. It's about a few kilometers northeast of Sheva. We know exactly where it is. It's been excavated, the Beersheba of Avraham Avinu. But it's a nice tourist trap, to have Be'er Avraham and set up a kiosk there and sell picture postcards. And it's a tourist trap. That's all it is. But here, the shul of Rashi, this is a building that exists from the 16th century. Rashi's dead already 500 years. So he wasn't there. But there is a suggestion that that shul may have been built on the ashes of a shul that did exist years earlier. Now we know Rashi is not from Worms. Where is he from? He's from a city called TORAH. It's spelled Troys on the map of northern France, TORAH. And Rashi was born there. And Rashi goes to Worms to study Torah by the greats of the Arei Shum, where Worms was most probably the most central of all. And then Rashi leaves Worms. All this before the pogroms. Rashi didn't live to see the pogroms. He goes back to TORAH to start a yeshiva. And you can see Mina Shamayim how that ultimately benefits OUisrael. Because when the yeshiva and the yeshivot of the cities of Shum, Speyer, Worms, and Mainz are decimated, Torah Center moves to northern France, where Rashi already established such a Torah Center with his grandchildren. Most probably the most famous is Rabbeinu Tam, right? So his name wasn't Tommy, that wasn't his name. His name was Rabbi Yaakov ben Meir. Rashi had daughters, and one of his daughters was Rabbeinu Meir, who had illustrious sons-in-law. One is the Rashbam, the commentator on Torah, Reb Shmuel ben Meir. One is one of the authors of the Balei Tosafot, the Rivam, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Meir, and one was known affectionately by his students as Rabbeinu Yaakov Ish Tam. Now that phrase is found in my Bar Mitzvah Parsha, in Parshat Toldot. Ve'Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Olim. It was an affectionate appellation to the name, Rabbeinu Yaakov Ish Tam. So then when the copyists, when they were writing about Rabbeinu Yaakov Ish Tam, they just miniaturized it to Rabbeinu Tam. It's Rabbeinu Yaakov Ish Tam, and he became known as Rabbeinu Tam. So that yeshiva in TORAH became the central place where the Tosfot begins, and then it became also Paris. So Tosfot, the author, the compilation of the Tosfot, which by the way is a 200-year endeavor, and the one who wrote about this was Professor Ephraim Elimelech Urbach, Zichron Bracha, who won Pras Yisrael. He was actually a candidate for president of Israel when what's his name, Katzir, Professor Katzir became the president, and then afterwards was. About the Balei HaTosfot, the Rav's son, Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, wrote a lot about it, and others, but Ephraim Urbach was probably the leader to discuss the period of the Balei HaTosfot, and it was a 200-year. Why do I say this? Because in a yeshiva setting, we speak about Tosfot as an individual. Tosfot asks, Tosfot says, Tosfot answers. Who is Mr. Tosfot? It's the Balei HaTosfot. So you have to speak in the plural. Tosfot ask. Tosfot responds. The Balei HaTosfot respond. Not in singular. It's not one person. So then the Torah Center moves to northern France. But before that, it was Worms. And Rashi knew we had to go to study Torah. He went to Worms. That was the place to be. And his teacher is a student of Rabbeinu Gershom Me'or HaGolah. Rabbeinu Gershom is from Mainz. And Rabbeinu Gershom is the luminary of 1096. 1096 is like the demarcation line of the pogroms after the First Crusade. So pre-1096, you have the Torah world building around Rabbeinu Gershom, or Hagolah, and his student becomes Rashi's Rebbe, and it's an unbelievable tradition that you have there. The Rav actually pointed out that we know that there's a concept called Nitkatnu HaDorot. From Har Sinai until today, Torah is in a gradual slide. The following generation, another generation further away from Har Sinai, the level of Torah knowledge and understanding depreciates. The Rav always believed that there could be an aberration. The Rambam believed it also, that is like an EKG, it can jump up. And the Rambam himself believed that he was on a much higher Torah knowledge level than many of his predecessors. Not all, but many of his predecessors. The Chazon Ish wrote the same thing about the Vilna Gaon. who dies in 1798, the Vilna Gaon. He believed that he was an aberration. He was just way up there. But generally, it's a little bit, you don't feel it from generation to generation, but in the course of 100 years, 200 years, you certainly see the depreciation of Torah. The difference between the Achronim and the Rishonim is noticeable. It's in many, many different ways. So that we have. But the Rav felt that Torah took a dive, literally a dive, 3 times in our history, and it almost was lost. The first time was after Rabbi Akiva and the Bar Kokhba revolution. Last week I mentioned that Rabbi Akiva miraculously is able to give smicha to 5 surviving Talmidei Chachamim who carry on the torch of smicha for another generation, a few generations. Torah almost was lost, and that was the reason that Rabbi Akiva begins the whole process of organizing the words of Torah Sheba'al Peh into a corpus, into a book, which we call Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi has, I was going to say a stroke of luck, but a hashgacha from heaven, that he has a Roman Antoninus friend who allows it to happen. So he had some protexia, and he allows the Mishnah to go public. And the purpose of the Mishnah was because Torah was going to be lost if we wouldn't do it. And we know that there's a prohibition of committing Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, to writing. So how did they do it? They used the pasuk in Tehillim Kuf Yud Tet, Eit Lasot Lashem Heferu Toratecha. If we don't do this, Torah's going to get lost. So we're allowed to trample on a halacha in the name of Torah. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi allows it to happen. But it begins with Rabbi Akiva. And the Rav said this was the dive that Torah took. The Rav said the second time the Torah took a dive was right here in 1096. And it's clear that those Rishonim from the 11th, 12th century, they knew, from the 3rd, 12th, 13th century, they knew they were on a lower pedestal. So much so, there's another Kina Hacharishi, it begins, also about this very period. And the poet says something, Mi afli nizarim and mi atir nidarim nizirot, and nobody knows what it means. What do you mean? Who's going to be able to absolve our nidarim and nazir? Nobody's a nazir today. There's no nazir anymore. Mi afli, mi atir. What does nidarim and nazirot have? And the Rav said something fascinating. Did you ever notice that when you study Masechet Nidarim and Masechet Nazir, the classical Tosfot is not on the page? It's not on the page. All of a sudden you have Rashi, because that was already known, and you have the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, from the 13th century. What happened to Tosfot? The traditions of these 2 Masechtot from pre-1096 got lost. And the Rishonim understood in the absence of those traditions, we're somehow, Megashashim ba'arafel, we're just in the darkness, we're just floating in the darkness, and we don't really have a handle on these 2 Masechtot, Nidarim and Masechet Nazir. And the poet says it in such an interesting way, Mi atir nidarim, mi afli nizarot. And the Rav said what he was saying was, who's going to explain to us these Masechtot? The Torah was lost. And it's lost forever. It's lost forever. And this is, the Rav said, there was a dive. Torah understanding took a dive after 1096. The Rav said the third time was the Shoah. Torah took a dive. And for those of us who had the zchut of knowing those Gdolei Yisrael who were pre-Shoah, who HaKadosh Baruch Hu granted them arichut yamim, long life, like people, like the likes of the Rav and Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Aaron Kotler and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they were pre-Shoah people, but they survived. And in America and those here in Eretz Yisrael, who, like Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who were able to, and the Panovitcher Rav, who survived and come to Eretz Yisrael to spread Torah, those who knew those greats know fully well how today, in the absence of that generation of immediately after Shoah, that what we have today are just people who are walking around with the name of being today's Gadol Ador, but they don't come close even, to those who were beforehand. Because Torah took a real dive. And that's, when I cry about the murder of Rabbi Chonan Wasserman, Hashem Yikom Damo, I stood by the pit that he was murdered in the 7th fort in Kovna. and it was Lithuanians who pulled the trigger, by the way. Let's,
Nazis had forgotten
what?
the Nazis had
Yeah,
forgotten.
yeah, but they were right. So I'm just pointing out the Lithuanians weren't tzaddikim. They weren't. They were doing Hitler's work before the real thrust came. And Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, I've said this on various trips. I have a page at home documenting a letter. I have a page. It's a zero copy of a letter, an authentic letter from Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. He writes to a friend in New York City in 1938, while he's turning down the offer of Dr. Revel from the Yeshiva Rabbi Chanan and the yeshiva in Chicago for him to come with his whole family and all his Talmidim. He was going to save them all, and he turns it down. I'm not going to discuss now, what the issues were. He felt that it was spiritual dangers in America. I'm not sure my Talmidim are even going to be Shomer Shabbos in America. And you want to know something? He was right. That was the case in America to a large degree. But he perishes with everybody in 1941. And I cry not only for Rabbi Chanan and for that decision, but also for the 50 Talmidim that went along. Because they could have grown up to become great Talmidei Chachamim. That's what the Rav said. The Shoah not only murdered the Talmidei Chachamim and destroyed the Torah centers, but when we're crying here about the children, we're talking about the potential Gedolei Yisrael that also was murdered at this time. And there's no question that miraculously we rehabilitated Torah on a quantitative level. That's no question. Dr. Yosef Burg, Zechron Lebracha, said, and now for sure, even after his death by so many years, that the number of people studying Torah today is unequaled in the history of Am Yisrael. Simple number, because it's accessible. It's accessible. Torah study is accessible. You just open up your phone and you can have Torah study on any level, and it's there, both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz, that's for sure. But qualitatively, we never replaced it, and most probably won't be replaced. That's what the Rav meant. Torah really took a dive. So here we talk about the third Alidirei Kahal Magensia Hahadura Minisharim Kalu Ume'arayot Li'itgabra. Does that remind you of any tefillah that we say on Shabbat? Avarachamim Hu Yarachem Amosim Minisharot Kalu Mararot Gaveru Lasot Litzon Konam V'chevetz Tzuram. This is from the Avarachmim that was composed after 1096 for these pogroms. The Avarachmim, you know when it was originally said? And here, I salute the Frankfurt Jewish community who never changed, because the word change is not part of the lexicon of German Jewish custom, right? It was said twice a year. The Shabbat before Shavuot, and that's because of these dates. The 8th of Iyar, the 23rd of Iyar, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the 3rd of Sivan, and Chag HaShavuot, the 6th of Sivan. The Shabbat before Shavuot, they said Avraham, and Shabbos Chazon. What?
Before Tisha B'Av.
Before Tisha B'Av, Shabbos Chazon.
That's my minute.
That's your minute. There you go. There you go. That was the original minute. And the only reason it was expanded in Ashkenaz, in Eastern Europe first, and then spread elsewhere, was in 1648, after Chmielnicki pogroms, the Gzerot Tachvatat of 1648. It was added to be said on other Shabbatot, except for those Shabbatot where we would not be saying Tachnun in a weekday. And that changed as well in some communities. Rav Tzvi the Kook Zatzal, the son of the Rav Kook, in the Merkaz Rav Kook Yeshiva, instituted to say Avarachmim every single Shabbat after the Shoah. And now when this war started, in many shuls, Avarachmim is being said every single Shabbat, no matter what. So you have this expansion of Avarachmim. So, in the days of the Sfira, there's this whole quabble as to whether you should say Avarachmim on the Shabbos of Birkat HaChodesh of Iyar and Sivan. It depends what calendar you look at. Some calendars that hold the first period of the Omer, so we'll say Avarachmim for benching Rosh Chodesh Iyar, but won't say it for benching Rosh Chodesh Sivan because it's after Lag B'Omer. And those communities that have from Rosh Chodesh until Shavuos, Rosh Chodesh Iyar to Shavuos, will say it from Birkat HaChodesh of Sivan, but won't say it for Birkat HaChodesh of Iyar because it's before Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Wonderful. So I remember in Ramot, we once had somebody who had 2 calendars in his talus bag. And whatever the gabbai would say to do, he pulled out the other one. Right? So I coined a new disease. It's called Avarachmim syndrome. Tismonet Avarachmim. It's for such people who think that the minig is to make a noise in shul. So I didn't want to embarrass him, God forbid, publicly, but after that, I pulled him over and asked him one question. Do you know who wrote the Avarachmim and when it entered into the Siddur? Knowing fully well that he wouldn't have a clue to answer either of those questions. I said, until you have the answer to that question, you don't have a right to even say if we say Avarachmim or not. That's what I told him privately. And it ended there. See, that was the medication that was the remedy. Right. So here you have Minisharim Kalu Mayarot Galit Gabra Hishlimu Nafsham Al Yichud Shem Hanora Valehem Zakat Shever Izak Ben Nefesh Mara. It always ends with the cry and the cry. And then he says, Al Shnei Mikdashay Yesodam Kehayom Ura. It's almost like the foundations of the 2 Batei Mikdash were destroyed today. Today, Tisha B'Av, again, I remind you, the Paitan. Val Chorvot Me'at Mikdashay U'Midrashei HaTorah. And in the same breath, when he mentions the destruction of 2 Batei Mikdash, he's talking about the destruction of the mini Beit Midrash, and mini Beit Knesset, which Chazal call all the Batei Knesset and Batei Midrash after Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. B'chodesh hashlishi, bashlishi, in the 3rd month, which is Sivan, the 3rd of the month. Nosaf lidavon umeira, the curse and the hurt, the pain just continued. Hachodesh asher nepach liagon v'tzara, the month that turned into all kinds of tzarot. And then further, B'yom matan dat, on the day the Torah was given, Zvan matan Toratenu, on Shavuos, on Shavuot. Sibarti lihit ashra. What does that mean? Sibarti lihit ashra. We'll get back to this in a second. Ubiyom netinata, the day that it was given, k'mochen az chazara. The day that it was given, it was returned. The Torah was returned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, the fact that Torah was destroyed, the Torah centers were destroyed, it means the day that was given, it departed. Limkom, the phrase sibarti lihit ashra. So I'm just going to translate it the way I have it in the OU edition. When I hoped to be spared in her merit. We thought that the Torah was going to save us, and it didn't. This should strike a contemporary chord. Torah Megina, Torah Matzila, Rabbanan lo tzrichim netiruta. Yeah? Well, guess what? They found out the hard way in 1096, and they found out the hard way in all the other pogroms, and they found out the hard way in the Shoah, and we found out the hard way with such wonderful Talmidei Chachamim who also fell in battle. It's very easy not to participate in the stand on the sideline and say, well, nothing happens to me because I'm not part of this. That's very, very easy. Here, they bemoaned the fact, they recognized, just like the Talmidei Chachamim of the Chevron Yeshiva in 1929, they thought that Torah is a merit to be saved. And they found out that it's not the case. It's not always the case. And you certainly can't hide behind it and say, okay, so I'm on the side. Or as Rav Lichtenstein pointed out in his great article on the ideology of Hesder, even if you think that you're such a tzaddik and Talmid Chacham worthy of being saved, what about sticking your hand out to help somebody else? What about that? Somebody else also needs some help. And I'm not going to go into the gory details of this, but I think this is going to change. Ubiyom netinata k'mochein az chazara. Alta lav lamarom. The Torah ascended, went back to its place. Limkom medorah. No more Torah here in Europe. Im teika v'narteka. The scrolls went with its mantle. v'hadorsha v'chokra, together with those who explain the Torah and those who investigate in Torah, and lomdeha, those who just study Torah, v'shoneha, those who just repeated the words. They were all lost. Simu na al levavchem misped mar lekoshra, ki shkula harigatam letabel ulehitabra. This is equivalent. This kind of murder is equivalent kisreifat beit Elokeinu, ha'ulam v'habira, the destruction of the hall and destruction of the city, the palace of Beit HaMikdash. We are mourning and we are full of ashes. Litabel ulitabra, from the word efer. V'chi'ein lohosif moed shever v'tavira. We can't add another day. I read this last week already. We can't add another day, because the day of Tisha B'Av is just extended of B'chiyah L'Dorot. Ve'ein l'hakdim, we're not going to make it earlier. Zulati la'achra. This is an interesting evoking a halakha that we don't push back earlier. We don't make earlier a day of tzara, but you can push it later. Tachat kain hayom livyati ara. Speaking again about today. Ve'espada ve'elila ve'efke b'nefesh mara. Vanchoti kavdu miboker ad erev, from morning to night, unending crying. And it ends just with crying and crying and crying and crying. And the question of Elohimo towards the end, where is God? I mean, that's been asked not only in the Shoah, it's been asked in all other tragic events. It's been asked. This is the Eicha, the collective Eicha for generations to come. Where's the Nechama? There's no Nechama in this poet. But the Rav pointed out that at 12 o'clock on midday, Chatzot of Tisha B'Av, something happens. Something flips in the spirit of Tisha B'Av, and it moves from Evel, from Kinot, to Nechama, to consolation. We put back the Parochet of the Or Kodesh. We sit on normal chairs. We put on Talit and Tefillin, and we read by Mincha. God gives us another chance, and it's all about Nechama. The Haftarah of the Tanit Tzibur in the afternoon from Yeshayahu, the message of consolation. The consolation here is we're sitting here in Yerushalayim and we're able to talk about it. There's no greater Nechama than that.